Hello and welcome to Ag PhD. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for joining us today. Well, 2019 is one of the wettest years we've ever seen in the Midwest, so guess what? A lot of people are asking us about drain tile. We're going to talk a little bit today about what you can do on your farm to improve drainage using tile.
You know, Brian, one of the natural things that helps improve drainage is to increase the calcium percentage in your soil. We're going to talk about exactly where you do need to be with calcium in terms of feeding your crop and having the best crop possible.
Coming up later in the show, we've got a weed of the week that we have been getting a lot of questions about here in the last few years. We're going to talk about how to solve this weed issue on your farm. But first, here's this week's Farm Basics.
You spend all year working hard to get as much yield as possible at harvest. The last thing you want to do is put your grain in the bin and have it spoil before you take it to market. Introducing the Grain Temp Guard from Farm Shop MFG. Designed and built by a farmer looking for a low-cost monitoring solution for existing bins, the Grain Temp Guard tracks temperature and humidity with an alarm system to alert you when your grain exceeds safe thresholds. For more information on a system for your bins, visit farmshopmfg.com.
During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to talk a little about cover crops. Now, when I read up on cover crops in all these farm magazines, I hear nothing but positive stuff. But today we want to talk about one of the potential negative consequences. What happens with your cover crop next year? And specifically, should I terminate that cover crop this fall, or should I let it grow all the way into the spring?
I don't think it's a negative thing, Brian. I think it's just a management decision that farmers have to make. And the tough challenge is, for quite a few farmers across the country, this is their first year of really doing a whole bunch of cover crop with some of the unplanted acres and so forth.
But here's the reason why I bring it up as a negative. We have seen cover crops carried into the spring that deplete soil moisture, and now next year's crop is not as good as it should be.
But
the other thing is, like even on our farm, even on our farm, we had cover crop on our farm where it delayed our planting by a week.
Okay, fine. That's fine. You can say that all you want. Yeah. But I know lots of farmers across the country that were excited to have cover crop growing in the spring because they had so much spring moisture that the cover crop actually sucked some of that moisture up. And they were like, wow, I actually got into the field earlier.
Right, and this is the whole point. We're not saying there's a right or wrong answer across the board, but there is a right and wrong answer on your farm. And so we want you to consider whether or not you should terminate this cover crop this fall or let it grow into spring.
All right, let's talk about this now. As we go further west and we get into areas that get less rainfall historically, like let's, for example, take central North Dakota. Farmers there like to kill the cover crop off in the fall because some of these cover crops can really linger quite a ways out there, maybe even out to Thanksgiving or beyond. Well, if you've got something still alive out in the field, that could create some challenges for you come next spring. You could have sucked more moisture out of the ground, like you mentioned, and set yourself up for a year where you could be stressed for moisture next year. However, as you go further east and get into areas that get lots and lots of rainfall in the fall and early in the spring, they probably want that cover crop still growing.
Right, so this is the first factor we want you to consider. Do you want less spring moisture or do you want more? Okay, the next thing we want you to consider is how warm should that soil be in the spring? So in my experience, when I let a crop grow into the spring, that soil is going to be colder. Now some people will tell you, especially as you go into the southern United States, oh, the soil will be warmer because there's all this life out there. I have not found that to be true in the northern part of the United States. So if you need a warmer soil in the spring, you may want to terminate your cover crop in the fall and then either do full-scale tillage or at least do strip till, so at least in the rows your soil can be warmer next spring.
All right, now when you mentioned the tillage, here's one of the things that I think about is the ground cover. If you didn't get enough growth in the fall, I know a lot of farmers that'll say, with my cover crop, if I don't get significant growth in the fall, I got it in kind of late, I want to let that grow into the spring and try and protect my soil as best I can. But if I got significant growth and say I'm a foot tall with some grasses or something in the fall, now I feel comfortable burning that off because I've got plenty of residue that I'll be planting into next spring and I don't have to worry about soil erosion.
Right, so there are a lot of things we want you to consider here, but again, our big question of the day is, should you terminate your cover crop this fall? Should you let winter kill it off? Or should you let it grow into the spring? I look at primarily moisture and warmer or colder soil in the spring.
And the last thing here, Brian, is what if that crop is not one that winter is going to kill off? It's been interesting seeing a lot of farmers using turnips and radishes in the Midwest that say, man, our winter, either we got early snow cover and it was protected, or it was just a mild winter. We didn't kill off some of those radishes
you
and other
normally
crops,
would with a hard
and now
frost.
I've got to deal with them in my next crop. So if you're concerned about that, or if you say, this is my first time with a cover crop, I just don't want to have any problems, you probably want to consider burning it off this fall.
Well, one of the things you might find, unfortunately, when you're out burning this off this fall or waiting till next spring is our Weed of the Week. We're going to tell you how to stop it on your farm coming up later in the show.
I need results, so I choose the one system I trust to take weeds down and keep them down on even my toughest acres with the kind of yield potential that helps keep me in the black to deliver my kind of results season after season. I choose the Roundup Ready Extend crop system. I choose results.
I've been completely satisfied with the job that XtendiMax has done.
It's a good product. It kills the weeds.
I'm extremely happy with my weed control. We're going 100% Extend next year as well.
This might be the best overall farm average on soybeans I'll have.
It works so much better than anything else that we used in the past.
It's been remarkable. We have seen a tremendous yield potential increase.
The XtendiMax takes the weeds down.
It just flat out works.
Tired of that old warped poly boom ruining your spray applications? Express Boom from Hypro is a fully assembled stainless steel boom that ensures an even application of chemicals every time. Don't wait another season, upgrade today. Hypro, helping you spray better.
Why do I farm? It's just something I've always wanted to do. Something I've known since I was my daughter's age. I think about what kind of farm I'm going to hand over to her. About how I can make it more successful, more sustainable. I talk to other farmers, with agronomists and advisors to help me make better decisions, to figure out what's working for them, and how to make it work even better for my farm. Because when you farm, you have a responsibility to keep it growing, to look at a freshly planted field, a newborn calf, even your bottom line. Then ask yourself, how do I help this grow? How can I make it even more productive? I ask myself these questions every day, because no matter what I'm doing, I'm still a farmer.
With all the moisture most farms had in 2019, there is a tendency to think, you know what, if I just get rid of surface moisture, I'm going to solve a lot of my problem. That is absolutely not true. With drain tile, what you can do is lower the water table in your field. Lowering the water table is the true solution for your farm. Because I want you to think about this. Even if you get rid of surface water, if your soil is still full of water, your roots can't grow down. Your soil life can't live because there's no oxygen there. You're going to have a poor soil, period, if you don't have good drainage. So we want to talk just a little bit today about installing drain tile, some of the common things we hear about drain tile that are not true, and why you should put some tile in on your farm if you've had a drainage issue.
First of all, Brian, I want to start here because almost every farmer I talk to, when we start talking about drain tile, they look at their absolute most difficult field to get things done and say, when I get to that field, it's going to be tough because I don't have slope, or I've got a neighbor that doesn't agree with me on how we should do things, or this challenge or that. Forget about the worst possible field. Let's start talking about, hey, you know what? I need tile in quite a few of my fields, or quite a few areas in my fields. Let's start working with the easiest area and just get the ball rolling.
Just as a quick example off our own farm this year, where we have tile on one side of the road, neighbors don't have tile on the other side of the road, we had tremendous crop on our side, planted close to on time. On the other side, prevent plant. It was that stark a contrast this year. And the other thing is, I look at the long-term health of that ground. Well, we're going to be able to raise much better crop next year because we had a crop out there this year, and because our soil life has continued to be able to thrive. Not only did we have a crop growing, but also the big factor is there was oxygen in that soil, so that soil life could do well. So the most important thing that I want you to think about today that a lot of people will basically talk against is this. When you put tile in the ground, it's one of the very best things you could possibly do for the environment. You're going to have a healthier soil. There's going to be cleaner water. You're going to have less flooding. It is an amazing thing when tile is done right. It's a benefit for everybody.
And think about this, you're just trying to control where that water table is at. So let's say you're putting tile in at about 3 feet deep in the soil. That's where a lot of our tile ends up, at about 3 feet deep. What you're doing is you're keeping the ideal composition of air, water, and soil from 3 feet and up. So the top 3 feet of soil, you've got about 25% air, 25% water, and 50% dirt. That's ideal for your crops and for your root growth. And then below, once you get to that 3-foot tile line, that's where the water table is going to be at its maximum.
Now, Darren mentioned 3 feet several times. There's nothing saying you have to be at 3 feet. Here's what I want you to consider when it comes to tile depth. How low do you want that water table? The purpose of getting the water table down is so you have room for your roots to grow, number one, obviously. But then number two, it's when you get lots of rain, you have created a reservoir to hold that rain over a short period of time. So for example, in a lot of our fields, we have things set up on a 1/2-inch drainage coefficient, which means we can get rid of a 1/2 inch of water per acre per day. Okay, so if I get a 4-inch rain, that means at a minimum, it's going to take 8 days for that water to slowly go out of my ground. Now, if I had my ground completely full of water already and I get a 4-inch rain, guess what? All 4 inches goes off and I might get that 4-inch rain in 3 hours. So that's where flooding occurs. And this is the reason why when you put tile in the ground, you see far less flooding and you see far less erosion, because water doesn't have to leave the field. It can slowly move down in the ground. And also, when it slowly moves down in the ground, it gets filtered. Soil is one of the best filters of water that there is. So that water, when it hits the tile line, usually it's quite clean. We typically see this as being drinking water quality by the time it hits that tile line. But all I'm getting at here is, let's say you live in an area that gets 50 inches of rainfall compared to where we are, where we get 22. Okay, maybe you want your tile lines a little deeper than 3 feet. Maybe you want them at 4 feet just to be able to hold a little more water. You have a little more capacity.
You know, the other thing, Brian, that comes in is what spacing do I put tile lines in my field? And let's just say that you've got a relatively flat field and you're going to have to do pattern tiling out there. The heavier your ground, the closer those tile lines are going to have to be together. And I just tell farmers, just get started. If you say, you know what, I'm going to put tile lines in every 100 feet, that's fine. You can always split those lines and come back out and put another line in between.
Here are the 3 biggest objections I hear from people when it comes to drain tile: cost, NRCS, and my ground's too flat. First of all, in terms of cost, I don't even know what to say here other than put some tile in the ground and you're going to find it pays really quickly. Tile is the best thing we've ever invested in on our farm. Number 2, NRCS. Don't forget, NRCS wants you to tile. I realize you may have some people that work in your area for NRCS that don't understand it, so they automatically think it's bad and, oh, we're draining all the duck ponds. That's nonsense. Okay, NRCS wants tile because the purpose of NRCS is to reduce erosion, and tile is one of the best things proven to reduce erosion. So that absolutely is not true. And by the way, as a United States citizen, you have the right to drain your ground. Number 3, ground is too flat. Okay, very, very simple. Yes, you're going to have to put a little more tile in if the ground is very flat, but you can bring your water to a lift station and you can pump it out. Now, before we put lift stations in on our farm, I also thought this would be expensive, and boy, the electricity bill. We've had one lift station that's shut off only briefly in the last 2 years, and my cost still isn't very much. Compared to what I've gained in yield, it's leaps and bounds better. So don't get too hung up on your cost, the NRCS thing, or my ground's too flat. You absolutely can get tiling done. We certainly have on our farm, and it has made such an enormous difference. That's why I'm so passionate about tiling, because it has literally transformed our farm. Most of our ground is now fantastic.
Well, one other thing that helps turn ground around to get it more productive is to control our weed of the week. We'll show you how to stop this weed later in the show.
Seasons, weather patterns, pests, weeds, diseases, new trends, tools, and technology. While farming as we know it continues to change, NK corn and soybeans consistently deliver. With the latest technology, high-performing genetics, and uncompromised value, NK helps you take on these challenges by maximizing your profit potential. Every acre, every single seed. NK Seeds, delivering technology, genetics, and value.
In 1949, Morton Buildings constructed our first machine storage building to establish our bond with the farming community. Since then, our relationship has grown, and so have our product offerings. From the smallest specialized operation to the largest agricultural enterprise, we understand the needs of your business and continue to evolve to meet industry demands. Plus, when you build a Morton building, you're backed by the strongest warranty in the business. To learn more about the Morton Advantage, visit mortonbuildings.com.
Mother Nature doesn't always cooperate. So when conditions are right, be ready with genuine Case IH parts from Titan Machinery. Only genuine Case IH parts are engineered to keep your equipment running at peak efficiency when you're running around the clock. Don't risk your bottom line with off-brand parts that don't meet the same standards. Visit your local Titan Machinery dealership today to find out why genuine Case IH parts offer the best value and performance for your operation.
More choices, more money. With Bayer Plus Rewards, you choose from our broad portfolio of high-performance products. Earn more money on the eligible products that are right for your farm. And use our new portal to see your purchases, track your rewards, and decide how you want to use them. Visit mybayerplus.com to sign in and start earning. That's the advantage of more control in your hands. That's the plus.
Tough, precise, efficient. Strip tillage with the Soil Warrior brings the future to your farm. Learn more at soilwarrior.com/agphd.
One of the most important things you need to look at in your soil is calcium. What is your calcium level in terms of both parts per million and percent base saturation? We're going to talk about the importance of calcium today.
Calcium is really important for the structure of your soil. You need enough calcium out there to have good pore space, to have good microbial life, good air movement, and also good water infiltration through your soil. Calcium is really important for nutrient uptake as well. In fact, it's been said that most nutrients come in on the back of calcium into your plants. You need calcium to be able to open that plant up and allow those nutrients to get in. So it's one of those really critical nutrients. However, for most farmers, they're looking at NP and K. How much nitrogen do I need? How much phosphorus do I have to apply? How much potassium do I need out in my soil? And they're kind of forgetting that the first thing they should be looking at is how much calcium I've got.
One of the things Darren didn't mention with calcium is soil pH. If you have a low soil pH, the fix to that is quite simple. It's lime. It's calcium carbonate. Now, you want to be careful about this because if you put on too much calcium carbonate, you can actually raise the pH beyond where you want it to get to. And also, you've got to look at what crops are you raising. So for example, if you're raising blueberries, well, blueberries like a 5, 5.5 pH. Corn likes about a 6.2, 6.3, 6.4. Okay, if you're raising alfalfa, that prefers somewhere around a 7 pH. So you might want to vary this depending on your crop and your cropping rotation. But again, calcium is tremendously important when it comes to pH.
One of the things that you want to look for on your soil test is your base saturation test. And if you don't have a base saturation on the soil test that you've been sending in, we'd strongly encourage you get a complete analysis done where you have micronutrients and base saturation and more to look at. With base saturation, there are 5 nutrients that we're looking at: calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, and hydrogen. And when we look at calcium, this one should occupy 65 to 75% of that base saturation test. If you fall somewhere in that range, your pH is generally going to fall in line, or at least relatively close, and you're going to have enough soil porosity to be successful with what you're doing with crop production. If you're below 60% calcium, in many cases, what we would ask is that you put some lime out there to try to raise that calcium up. Those 5 nutrients in base saturation add up to 100%. And if we're low in the calcium, we must be high in something else.
Now, when Darren talks about 65 to 75%, let's say you have 90 or 95% calcium. Look, we're not telling you that in one shot, in one application of a bunch of other stuff, you can drop that calcium down to 75% and make it pay. Now, I'm not saying that wouldn't necessarily be a good thing for you to get the calcium down a little bit, but it's going to cost some money. You'd have to add some other products to it, and it really could take some time. So the big thing to focus on here is, let's take a look at soil pH, let's take a look at parts per million of calcium, and ideally, yes, if we're in that 65 to 75% range of calcium, that's great. If not, we should probably strive toward that range as a long-term goal on our farm, and usually we're going to have healthier soil.
So to sum things up with calcium, it's important to look at the parts per million. It's also important to look at the base saturation percentage so you can start to determine what's going on, what am I high in, what am I low in, and do I need to add more calcium to help my crop. One other thing that will help your crop is controlling our weed of the week. Can you identify this week's weed?
The Weed of the Week is brought to you by Corteva Agriscience, Agriculture Division of Dow DuPont. Finish the fight against tough weeds with the Enlist Weed Control System.
Weeds are tough, but we're tougher. With unrivaled weed control, reduced drift, and near zero volatility. So, who's tough now?
Our weed of the week is foxtail barley.
Foxtail barley is just a short-lived perennial weed, doesn't have rhizomes or anything like that. But boy, this has been a tough weed here for the last few years, kind of spreading across the United States. We're going to talk today about how to solve this problem on your farm.
You know, some of the toughest areas, Brian, have been reduced till, no-till, pastures, roadside ditches, these kinds of places where we're not doing any tillage. If we just did some tillage, Brian, we'd probably stop our weed of the week.
Hey, don't forget about sodic and saline soils. This weed is a little bit tolerant to those soils as well. Now, let me start in pastures. Okay, a lot of times what we talk about is, let's forget about herbicides entirely for a second. The biggest thing, and just like Darren mentioned, in some of these tough areas, well, what is it? It's lack of crop canopy. So if you have this problem in your pasture, that tells me, hey, maybe there isn't the right fertility program out there. Maybe we need to move to rotational grazing and not overgraze that pasture. If you let that pasture compete, well, it has a pretty good chance against the foxtail barley. But once it gets behind the 8-ball in the spring, well, then you're going to have a problem.
Well, same thing in our crop fields too. If we're raising a good, healthy crop and we're keeping the soil in balance, like you mentioned, we get into a salty or sodic area, we're going to have trouble growing crop out there, and that's a problem.
Okay, so in terms of herbicides to control foxtail barley, Roundup is excellent on it, but just understand it's going to take more Roundup than it would to kill foxtail, for example, just regular foxtail, green or yellow. You're going to need the full labeled rate, and then you'll do pretty well on this particular weed. Now, out in pastures, it gets tough because, yes, we've got plateau and pastora, and I mean, there are a few grass killers in pastures for certain grasses, but boy, they're not going to do a whole lot on this perennial foxtail barley. So unfortunately, if you had a pasture and you had a major problem, I'd suggest using Roundup, wipe out the pasture and start over. If you have this weed in soybeans, start with a good pre, use one of the yellows especially, trifluralin, sonalan, or prowl, follow post-emerge with one of the grass killers, Select Max or something with clethodim in it's probably the best. In corn, I'd probably start with one of the group 15s, then follow post-emerge with Accent unless you have the ability to use Roundup or Liberty in your crop. And then finally in wheat, start with something like Prepare, follow post-emerge with Axial, or maybe it's Everest. I mean, you've got some options, but just understand there's nothing that is fantastic on this weed in wheat.
That's all the time we have for this week's weed, but Iron Talk is coming up next.
What's the most complex industry on Earth? It isn't big data or commodities, not genetics or meteorology or even logistics. It's a business that involves them all. It's farming. And we're proud to work with generations of American farmers in the most complex and rewarding industry on Earth.
There are a lot of steps to having a perfect season. Don't let your fertilizer plan be the step that trips you up. No matter when you apply fertilizer, no matter how, AgroLiquid has the experts and the products that'll help you move closer to your target and hit the bullseye. AgroLiquid moves you closer to your target.
It starts with genetics, what you're made of. It takes agronomy. It's local. It's knowing your land and having the tools to put the right product in the right place. It's built on service with trust, grit, and determination. Because it turns out, what it takes to make the best product is a lot like what it takes to make a farmer. Golden Harvest, rooted in genetics, agronomy, and service.
More choices, more money. With Bayer Plus Rewards, you choose from our broad portfolio of high-performance products. Earn more money on the eligible products that are right for your farm. And use our new portal to see your purchases, track your rewards, and decide how you want to use them. Visit mybayerplus.com to sign in and start earning. That's the advantage of more control in your hands. That's the plus.
Do you feel like there's never enough time to get everything done before planting? The window for spring work is quick and unforgiving. Give yourself the upper hand with the ProTill High Performance High Speed Disc. More and more farmers agree the ProTill is the right tool for springfield conditions and heavy residue management. Zero maintenance bearings, independent disc technology, oversized pins and bushings allow the ProTill to handle whatever field or conditions you can throw at it. Degelman High Performance Equipment.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
At Harvest, you have one goal: finding the perfect flow of grain from the field to the bin. Case IH axial flow combines are engineered for matched capacity to deliver proven grain savings, so you can keep efficiency flowing smoothly. Find yours with the Case IH axial flow.
Safety is the most important thing every day on the farm. While there are less farmers each year applying anhydrous ammonia, there's still quite a few out there. Now, if you find yourself planning to use anhydrous this season, here are some safety tips for you in today's Iron Talk. The word anhydrous means without water. You may know that it burns skin, but the way it does it is by causing rapid dehydration. So insist on wearing personal protective gear whenever handling anhydrous. Wear tight-fitting, chemical-proof goggles or a full-face respirator. Rubber gloves that protect against anhydrous ammonia are also a must. Coveralls or a heavy work shirt are advised as well. Even if you've been working with anhydrous for many years, it only takes one little mishap to cause permanent damage, so take care. The second safety tip is to thoroughly inspect the equipment before each use. Look for cracks on hoses or signs of wear or slippage around the couplers. Purge the lines each and every time that you unhook or inspect them, and check the toolbar quick coupler regularly and replace as recommended or as wear dictates. When switching from tank to tank, make sure that your hoses are the proper length. Also, always use the safety chains and hitch pins with safety clips to ensure that the hoses aren't stretched and a tank never comes unhooked. Just to be safe, keep your speed 25 miles per hour or less when moving tanks down the road from field to field. If you follow all these recommendations, accidents will be much less likely. But if you do have one, both farmers and custom applicators are required to report the incident to regulatory agencies. So be careful and be safe if using anhydrous ammonia this fall. Wear personal protective gear every time, check over the equipment thoroughly before each use, and drive slowly when moving tanks to avoid problems. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now, back to the show.
Well, that's our time for today, but if you're looking for more agronomic information, we'd encourage you to check out the Ag PhD Insider magazine. For more information, just go to agphdinsider.com.
And don't miss the next Ag PhD TV show. We'll have another Weed of the Week, Farm Basics, Iron Talk, and a whole lot more. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.